If we're not moving our bodies enough and not exercising, that could be a reason. If we don't eat foods that are healthy for us, that's a huge reason. Oftentimes we'll end up with nutrient deficiencies. And there's so many nutrients that we need as cofactors to make good neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the molecules of emotion, right, of our brain that we need to stay balanced, to have good mental health, things like serotonin and dopamine and GABA, right? All of those things are designed to be in balance so that we have good mood. And our body purposely lowers those things so that we stay stressed or we stay depressed because we're trying to create this response.
Dr. Peter Bongiorno, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast. My friend, I am so excited to see you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. So excited to see you as well.
Well, we're going to touch on a hot topic for about the next 30 to 45 minutes, which is mental health. And I couldn't think of a better person to bring in than you as a naturopathic doctor working in an integrative setting who can tell us the best of both because man, let's be real. The last several years have been rough. Our current year is rough, and it's really affecting people's mental health, like how they feel, how they're doing. What are you seeing?
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, before the pandemic, there was an incredible rise in mental health issues already, and the number of prescriptions for anxiety and depression and even bipolar had increased substantially. And then the pandemic hit, and those numbers just completely blew out of the water. I mean, now we're just seeing rates of 25%, 30% levels of anxiety, anywhere between 10 and 15 and 20% depression, depending on, where you're looking, what geographical areas and populations, and overdosing. It's astronomical what's happening. And despite all the medications being prescribed, it's just still getting worse and worse and worse. So we know at some level that we need to do something else, right? There's got to be another way to work on that.
I want to set the stage for when somebody is listening to this, maybe they've already been diagnosed or they're thinking to themselves, I would like to see it get evaluated. I have depression or anxiety or suspect other conditions. When they go the conventional route, I'd like to talk about what can they expect there versus maybe what they could expect in your world, how you would prefer it.
Sure. Well, I mean, the first step in the conventional route or any good medicine route is you look for any safety issues. So if someone is thinking to hurt themselves or to hurt somebody else, I mean, that's the first thing we want to know is if somebody's safe or not. And then if they're not in a safe situation, then we want to make sure we can assure that. Right. So any good doctor, any good practitioner is going to want to do that. I think with conventional medicine, once that is assured, then it's really more about, well, what is your condition and what kind of drug do we have to treat that condition? Now, again, if someone is really in an urgent care situation, then sometimes that might be appropriate. I love natural medicine. Natural medicine involves oftentimes testing, involves different things that need to change. And oftentimes it's not something that's going to make a change that quickly. So if somebody is in an urgent care situation, they're probably not going to feel like they're going to be able to do the things I might ask them to do: diet changes, lifestyle changes, supplements, testing, all that. So in those cases, medication might be a life saving thing to do. So I'm all for it. I think the issue I have with conventional care is that oftentimes medications and therapy is recommended. And then if people feel better, they just kind of stay there. Whereas the medications themselves really don't look at the underlying causes of what's going on and why people have these mental health concerns. And that's where I think what naturopathic medicine, what functional medicine, what good holistic care can do. We really look for the underlying causes of why somebody has depression, of why they have all these anxious thoughts, and then really work to heal them and fix them and get them to the place where they don't have them anymore, but don't have to rely on medication.
It's interesting. Many moons ago, I worked in an integrative office, a brand new integrative office with an MD, and she wasn't yet familiar with a root cause approach. And I was seeing one of her patients for severe anxiety. It was the first time seeing her. And the MD said, she's coming in on an acute call, severe anxiety. Just here's the anti anxiety I recommend. send her on her way. And it turned out the poor woman had all sorts of metabolic dysfunction. She had just broken up with her boyfriend. Her business had a failing month. Like, I was a big snowball effect. I would be anxious. I mean, I had a lot of empathy for her. And I remember talking to the doctor, the other doctor afterwards, and she said, "Did you just put her on the medication?" And I said, "Well, yes, acute state. And here is the laundry list of the root causes behind it. Here's what else is going on." And the doctor looked at me and said, "God, I never would have asked her any of that. I would have just prescribed the medication and moved on." And I thought, yeah, that's the difference. That's the difference. Because huge. And people, and this is what I want to get into next. Yes, there are all the life reasons somebody is anxious or depressed. But I've also heard you talk about multiple times metabolic, blood sugar, the other stressors that can happen, viruses, bacteria, illness, inflammation, diet, lifestyle, etc. So I want to get into that to give people an idea of what else might be contributing, what could be the root cause.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I talk about in my books. That's what I talk about when I lecture, whether it's to the public or to other doctors, that there is no one organic cause, right? It's a whole syndrome of things. And it's usually a lot of small things. And I've had so many of my patients, let's say, for example, with anxiety, and they'll wake up in the morning and they'll just feel like there's something wrong and they just feel very anxious and they look around and there's nothing wrong, right? And the way I explain it is like, yeah, like if they were in a situation, let's say they were in a room and a bear came in the room and growled at them, right? Of course they would feel that way, right? They would feel the same way. But the thing is, there's no bear in the room, and yet they're acting like there's a bear in the room that might attack them. And the reason is because inside their body is stress hormones and things that are coursing and going through their brain and going through their bloodstream that are making them feel that way. So we need to understand, well, what's causing that. And like you said, there are many reasons. And this is what I talk about day after day, right? There's so many different reasons. First of all, there's lifestyle, right? There's sleep. I saw a teenager this morning who came in for pretty significant anxiety. He's not sleeping. He's not going to sleep. And then he's not sleeping well when he goes to sleep, right? So that alone is going to make you feel like this and not allow you to be calm, right? That'll suppress your calming neurotransmitters when you don't get enough sleep, right? Because why do animals stay up at night? Either because they're hungry or they're being chased or something, so that you're going to have this stress response. If we're not moving our bodies enough and not exercising, that could be a reason. If we don't eat foods that are healthy for us, that's a huge reason. Oftentimes we'll end up with nutrient deficiencies. And there's so many nutrients that we need as cofactors to make good neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the molecules of emotion, right, of our brain that we need to stay balanced, to have good mental health. Things like serotonin and dopamine and GABA, right? All of those things are designed to be in balance so that we have good mood. And our body purposely lowers those things so that we stay stressed or we stay depressed because we're trying to create this response, right? So food is a really important part of it. Inflammation in our bodies can contribute to depression. When the nervous system is inflamed, it's much, much more likely we're going to get anxious, we're going to get depressed. As you know so well, when hormones are in balance, right? Whether it's testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, those things can really participate in why the nervous system is going to be much more likely to create an anxiousness or depression or even a bipolar or even a schizophrenia kind of situation. So there are so many things, mitochondrial dysfunction, right? The little energy packs in our body that in each cell we have, except for red blood cells. And when they're not working well, then we can't produce energy for our nervous system. And then our nervous system doesn't work. And then we're going to be more prone to mental health issues too. So there's a lot of small reasons. And I think in modern psychiatry, like you said, they don't ask the question sometimes because there just isn't enough time. When you have a certain amount of time for a visit, you ask some basic stuff, make sure somebody's safe, and then say, okay, based on your symptoms, try this drug. If this one doesn't work, we'll try this one. This one doesn't work, we'll try that one. And again, in an acute, urgent situation, it could be life-saving. So I'm not blanketly against that, but we just see time and time again that all of these millions and millions of prescriptions are not addressing any of those underlying issues.
You mentioned the neurotransmitters. Can you explain, first of all, more about neurotransmitters? And then how do the medications work? Are they actually giving us more neurotransmitters? Are they building us more neurotransmitters? Or is some other mechanisms for people to understand?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the neurotransmitters are these molecules that the nervous system makes that helps us stay motivated or helps us stay calm or helps us be happy. And our bodies are going to purposely raise them up or bring them down depending on the situation. Now, if something difficult happens in our life, right, dopamine might go down, for example, and that will make us have low mood. Now, maybe there's an advantage to that in that moment because sometimes when difficult things happen, we don't want to go out and party or do things. What we want to do is kind of become introspective and lay low and kind of process so we can understand what to do next. So, in a way, that's a healthy thing. Sometimes it goes too far and then people get very depressed and they don't take care of themselves. And that's when it becomes a problem, right? But all of these things are designed for optimal use, right? For us to be as healthy as possible when the system is running well. So, neurotransmitters are, like I said, the molecules of emotion, right? That was a term coined many years ago by Candace Pert. And she was one of the people who discovered how things like serotonin can actually create really good mood, or how GABA can lower anxiety by being around in the brain system by calming the nervous system down. So we have these neurotransmitters, and it's been shown, there's some research, but others are controversial. But overall, it's been shown that when there's a balance of these, that it helps keep our mood, right? So if there's an imbalance in them, and let's say something's low, then you can take a medication like let's say an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. What that does is that raises serotonin. Now, if someone has low serotonin and they're very anxious and they take it, it does make them feel better, right? But the issue is that it's not fixing the situation. What it's doing is it's basically stopping enzymes that break down serotonin. Now, if your body either doesn't want to make serotonin or has a reason, like let's say low vitamin D or low vitamin B6, that doesn't allow it to make serotonin, it's not fixing that problem and actually is just depleting the whole system even more. So, and that's why you'll see there's actually a term in modern psychiatry called poop out syndrome. And it's a well known term because what happens is within a couple of years, medications like that tend to poop out. They stop working because the system eventually kind of gets depleted because we haven't fixed why that serotonin was low to begin with, if that's even the problem, which in many cases of depression, it actually isn't.
In many cases, what is it then?
Well, it's all the other things I mentioned. It's imbalances in blood sugar, it's problem with digestion. Oftentimes, when the neurotransmitters in the brain are out of balance, it's because the digestive tract is so out of balance. So there's multiple reasons. Like I said before, could even be vitamin D. Vitamin D is often very low in a lot of people who have mental health concerns.
I've even heard an interview where you discussed one of your early patients. You might have even been a student, and it was an iron deficiency was the cause of somebody's depression.
Yeah, I remember maybe about 24, 25 years ago, I was a student at Bastyr in Seattle. And I remember one of the first patients I saw who had depression, she came in and our supervisor there, Dr. Wallace, great doc, and I know he's still there. He ran an iron panel and saw that the woman's iron was very low, gave her iron, and she came back in about a month. And when she came back, she jumped up on the table and Dr. was like, "Oh, you look good today." She goes, "Oh, yeah, I feel great." She goes, "That iron really worked." And he said, "Okay." And he checked on the medication. She goes, "Oh, I stopped taking that." Now, I'm not recommending people stop taking their antidepressant medication. You always want to check with your doctor before you do that. But the story is quite valid. And it really shows. Now, it makes sense, right? Because what does iron do? Iron is the middle of a molecule in the blood that carries oxygen, and that carries oxygen to your brain. And if you don't have enough oxygen going readily to your brain as you need it, your brain is going to feel depressed. That's one of the reasons for depression. So, as simple as that, I know most docs aren't regularly checking that, even though I think it should be checked.
I think a lot of things should be routinely checked. Full thyroid, vitamin D, the B vitamins. I mean, I'm on your side. I've definitely seen with my own eyes B12 deficiencies or women in menopause, so low estrogen, men with low testosterone, and the impact that does play on their mood.
Absolutely. I mean, the work you do with hormones, all I've learned from you about hormones and how it affects the nervous system and mental health. I mean, you're helping a lot of people because that's an area I think for even most doctors can be very confusing and yet so important. I mean, estrogen is so important for how serotonin receptors are made and how serotonin itself is produced. And when that fluctuates or changes, you're going to see vast changes in mental health alone.
And she probably feels it as well. I mean, she could tell you just based on her symptoms of, yes, I get big swings before my period or around my period or at ovulation or in perimenopause.
I saw a patient last week who came in for a first visit, and she came in for depression, and she was in that perimenopausal range, and she stopped having a menstrual cycle maybe about 8 months ago. And she told me that about every 6 weeks, she goes into this very significant depression. And we talked about whether she felt like she was still cycling, even though she wasn't having a menstrual cycle. The fact of the matter was is that her body was still cycling and her brain was still reacting to the very low hormones at certain parts of her cycle. So we started working on it and she's just starting to get improvement. And for her, it was very exciting because she probably went to 3 different docs. She's been dealing with this for a while. And no one actually ever connected her menstrual cycle because they all said, oh, well, she doesn't have one. But so as you know, she's still cycling.
Yeah, I wish hormones, of course, being my passion, I wish hormones for both men and women were much more widely taught when it came to mental health. I mean, think of the amount, even the amount of men who suddenly or slowly become less motivated, right? More snappy, more angry, not enjoying life. And they're just talking, oh, it's just stress. I'm just not sleeping as well. But truly behind the scenes, their testosterone can be declining. And for men, testosterone plays such a big role in serotonin and dopamine. And
That prefrontal cortex. Yeah, and for libido, all those other things that seem to be attributed to other factors, right? Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I see with medications, and again, when medications used properly, it can be life-saving. So I'm not completely against them, but they're just so overused and even more covering up the underlying issues. I have a patient who started with me quite a while ago, and I remember the story so vividly. Came in because she went through a divorce, was very, very depressed. Now, the divorce was 10 years prior, and she was put on medications for it. And the medications helped her feel better. They told her, look, it'll help you get through things. And she stayed on it. She ended up meeting someone else, very happy, got married, felt really good. And then about 10 years later, she started having side effects from it. So they felt she had to come off it. So when she came off it, and they did wean her off, all the feelings of the divorce came back from 10 years prior. And this is something I do see over and over that when people take the medications, they can feel better, but it sort of blocks whatever processing or coping mechanisms we would normally create for ourselves during that process. It's not an easy process, but it does teach us how to move forward in life by going through those things. And I believe the medications can block that process. And it's something that at some point we're going to have to go through. So I'd rather walk with somebody and help them move through it and help them create the people around them to help them do that. So that this way you move to basically a higher plane. And that's something I think sometimes we lose with just using medications.
can you actually walk us through that? If somebody is listening to this right now and they're saying, yes, that's me, or if anyone's listening who is currently, unfortunately, going through something major, what are your favorite ways to get to that higher plane, to walk through this in a healthy manner?
Sure. Well, if they're on medications, the first step is don't change your medication by yourself, right? Just especially if you're not having side effects, stay there. But then I would say find someone who you feel is knowledgeable to help you with that. That's why I love good naturopathic doctor, a good functional medicine doctor, someone with that background to really look at you holistically, as they say, mind, body, spirit, to really look at the whole thing and start on the aspects that you need. Some people, it's more physical and their cortisol levels are high and they're just not getting sleep and their food intake isn't great. And if we fix those things, then they'll have more resilience. You know, I just read an article the other day talking about how when B12 is in proper levels, how the brain just has so much more resilience to stress. And we know that in postpartum depression, oftentimes B12 levels can be low. and that when you give a woman B12, she can feel so much better in postpartum depression. So it's things like that. It's like finding a good practitioner, because honestly, it's not something you want to do yourself, because when you feel especially depressed, it's hard to motivate. It's hard to even read a book. I wrote a book for the public on anxiety, and I wrote a book for the public on depression. And the anxiety book gets very well read, but not so much the depression book, because when you're depressed, you don't want to do anything, right? It's just hard to motivate. And if anyone feels that way and is listening to that podcast, I give them a lot of credit, because you're doing this. And I know that takes a lot when you feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to the GI tract because I think that loses people. How would somebody's digestion, stomach, intestines play a role in how they feel?
Yeah, so I think a couple of ways. First is when I think about the digestive tract, I think about just basic movement. I like to make sure people are having a bowel movement or pooping every day, because it's so important as a way to release excess toxins. The liver is always dumping things like hormonal metabolites into the intestines. And it's our body's way to keep things in balance by getting rid of what it needs to. And if we're not having a bowel movement, preferably every day, then that's the first reason why sometimes people's brain won't feel good. Because when those things aren't in balance, it's less likely blood sugar is going to be in balance. It's less likely hormones are going to be in balance. And it's more likely we're going to keep more toxins in our body that it's going to be harder to get rid of. So that's one. The second thing I think about is the microbiome, right? Which is the good bacteria and other things that line our digestive tract. And all of those bacteria are very, very important to the functioning of our nervous system and our brain. And more research is coming out about the gut brain connection. And it's showing that if the digestive tract isn't healthy, it's much harder to keep the brain healthy. There's actually a nerve called the vagus nerve, not Las Vegas, like in Nevada, right, where you go gamble, but Vegas, Vagus, the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that goes from the brain to the whole digestive tract and back. And when the gut is in good health, it sends signals back to the brain to also be in good health and to feel right and to feel balanced. So it's really important to have a really good digestive tract and a healthy digestive tract. So that's going to involve drinking enough water, getting good quality fiber, not eating too much sugar, making sure we're having foods that are anti-inflammatory for the most part. Not that people can't cheat every once in a while, but for the most part. And then if people have food sensitivities or actual overt food allergies, that gets taken care of too. One of the things I like to see when I work with patients is I usually check a celiac panel, check for overt gluten allergy. And that's so important. You know, many people actually have gluten allergies and they have celiac and they don't even know it. Like recently, I had a family member who she had it too, and no one ever knew that before, and definitely feels better now than not eating gluten. I've seen that with so many patients as well. So these things need to be checked, and the digestive tract is such a key.
When you mention anti inflammatory foods, can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah. So there's different ways to prepare foods. So first I think about how to prepare foods. So almost any food could be inflammatory if you fry it, right? It's also going to be more delicious if you fry it.
Yeah, I was like, it's unfortunate.
You could fry a doorknob, it's going to taste pretty good. But the problem is when you prepare foods that way, they become much more inflammatory in your body. There's actually receptors for the things that happen in fried foods that make your body more angry and more inflamed. So I generally recommend when we're working on a healthy diet that we also work on how we prepare foods, like baking things instead of frying it and grilling it if possible, cooking things at lower temperatures, because that's one way to lower inflammation in the body. And there's studies that show that when you do that, and there's a term for them, they're called advanced glycation end products. When you cook foods at high temperature and create these advanced glycation end products, and the acronym is AGES, AGES, because that's what they also do. The inflammation ages your body too. So when you can eat a low age diet, you're going to also feel better and have less inflammation. And then there's the foods we eat, right? There are certain foods that are typically pretty inflammatory to most people. Like I find dairy products can be inflammatory for a lot of people. Like I mentioned, gluten, people can be very sensitive to that. And then it really kind of depends on which foods might be associated with inflammation for different people.
What about lab work? So if somebody comes to see you for the very first time, they're listening to this. Let's give a list. Would you have foundational lab work that you like and then maybe some spin-off extras that could guide somebody where to go?
Yeah, so generally I do like to see lab work, all the basics, like a good complete blood count, definitely an iron panel, which to me is a basic. I know it's not always a basic in conventional care. A very full thyroid panel is very important. A chemistry panel that looks at things like your electrolytes and your kidney function and your liver function. And then I also like to see inflammatory markers, things like homocysteine, C-reactive protein, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, also known as ESR. And then I also like to look at nutrients. So I like to look at B12, vitamin D, zinc, copper, magnesium, some cases, maybe vitamin B6, coenzyme Q10. There's an amino acid called carnitine, which is finally, after so many years of me thinking about it and running it, I think it's finally starting to get some press about how important it is for the nervous system and for mental health too. So I like to look at that. I like to look at a urine panel. Sometimes we could see certain things going on in the urine as well. And I like to look at heavy metals. So I usually start with blood tests and heavy metals, and then maybe even do some advanced testing on that too. I don't know if I missed any, but those are definitely a lot of the basics that I like to see. So it's a lot. It's along the celiac panel, which I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
With the iron panel and the thyroid panel, can you break that out for people? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So an iron panel has a couple of different components. So you want to look at your serum iron, which is the actual iron that's in your bloodstream. And you like to look at iron saturation, which is how much iron is binding to the proteins that carry iron around. And then I like to also look at ferritin, which is iron storage. So those three at the minimum are a good way to get a good sense of like what's going on with the iron balance in your body.
Okay. And what about for thyroid? Same thing.
Yeah, so thyroid in conventional care, usually they'll run TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's the hormone that comes from your brain that tells your thyroid to make hormone. What I also like to see at the minimum is I like to look at T4, which is made in the thyroid, which gets converted in your cells to something called T3, which is your active thyroid hormone. And the T4 and the T3 kind of go back to the brain and tell the brain how much hormone is around. And then the brain uses the TSH to tell the thyroid to make more hormone. And so it kind of goes back and forth. So at the minimum, I like to see those. And I also like to see thyroid antibodies because many people have autoimmune issues where the body attacks the thyroid. And that could be a reason why thyroid function goes down. And then mentally, they don't feel good. Now, they might even be constipated. They might feel cold. They might have dry skin. It's important, I think, to check the antibodies too, because usually that TSH just isn't enough. And depending on what doctor you talk to, like I studied under Alan Gaby, right? Dr. Gaby, who kind of teaches us that, yeah, you can run thyroid, but it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about what's really going on with thyroid. You have to still really look at all the symptoms and maybe help treat a person based on symptoms and not even so much the numbers. So I do both because I like to take a poll.
Be comprehensive. What about supplements? We hear all the time, like, oh, everybody needs vitamin D or everybody needs fish oil. Do you obviously incorporate supplements into your practice, but do you have some sort of statement or blanket idea for people of like, yes, fish oil generally works really well, or yes, vitamin D generally when you're looking at your patients?
Yeah. Well, the first step is to get a really good intake and really understand what the challenges of the patient. So we know they have mental health concerns. Maybe it's anxiety or depression are the most common. But then I want to find out, well, what else is going on physiologically? So I'll ask them, do you have gut issues? Do you have sleep issues? Do you have musculoskeletal issues, other nervous system type of issues, hormonal issues? And then we get the testing, right, to check on other physiology and things that maybe they don't even know about. And then once we have all that information, then we could start making a plan for supplements. It's like you can go into a health food store and there's so many supplements and they all sound good. And you could literally be taking 300 supplements a day and spending thousands of dollars a month and still not really going after the issues that are your concerns. And that's why I like to get all that information because then the supplements we use are going to be used to work on helping those. So you mentioned vitamin D. Yeah, everybody needs vitamin D if it's low, if they have good levels of vitamin D. And I also look at genetic testing sometimes to look at things like vitamin D receptors or B12, for example. I also look at genetics for B12 because sometimes people can have normal levels of B12, but their genetics might suggest that the B12 isn't actually getting into their cells. So sometimes it's still valuable to give people certain vitamins, even if their levels are okay, because they actually need more because of their genetic makeup. So that's how I like to use supplements, like understand what their physiology is. If their gut is an issue, then maybe some gut supplements might be good. For example, a probiotic. Probiotics used in patients who are anxious, certain strains have been shown to be helpful to raise GABA, which is the calming neurotransmitter. It stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. And so if they have gut issues and you use the right probiotics and work on their foods and their stressors and things, you can get the body to naturally start to raise GABA, which calms the brain down. So those are great. There are some supplements that are just classics. Like I know one thing that I think is almost ignored now is St. John's wort, but it's brilliant, brilliant herb. And it works in so many ways in the body, in the nervous system, as well as on the periphery of the body too. And it's been shown to be so helpful, as good as antidepressants for anxiety and also depression. So that's a beautiful herb. You just have to be a little careful with St. John's wort because it does affect how the liver processes other drugs. So for example, if a woman is taking a birth control pill, it could actually stop the ability of the birth control pill to work. And I've seen cases of that. So I know it can happen. Even though they're natural, it doesn't mean they're always like, no problem, won't have any issue for me. But that's a classic one. Magnesium, which is so good for sleep, so good for calming the nervous system. That can often be used very successfully with no side effects. Every once in a while, people can get a little low stool with it. But other than that, it's a pretty safe one to use. Unless you're allergic to fish, usually people do need essential fatty acids and fish oils. So you mentioned that. I think that can be a really good choice too. I would say if somebody doesn't know where to start and they just want to start something, better to go get the testing to see what you really need. But a good quality multiple vitamin, a fish oil, and a probiotic is a reasonable place to start.
Yeah. And it'll probably help at least temporarily or a little bit shore up some of the deficiencies that they might have until they can get in to see somebody or get their test results back or whatever it is. Amazing. Okay. So, given that this is the Root Cause Medicine podcast and I'm all about practical and tactical, as we sort of wind this up, what would be like your top 2 or 3 take home messages that you just really want people to know from your perspective when it comes to mental health and your approach to it?
Sure. Well, one is if there's any safety issues, go to a psychiatrist, go to urgent care, and make sure you're in a safe place. Tell your loved ones, tell people you feel safe with how you're feeling, and make sure you stay safe. So, number 2 would be find a practitioner who kind of understands holistic medicine and hopefully has experience in it to start really understanding the root causes and just know that everyone's good at something, right? And I go to an accountant because I'm not good at accounting, right? But it's all confusing to me. And I think medicine is confusing to a lot of people. So it's not something you have to figure out yourself. Go to somebody who's really good at it to help you understand it and come up with a plan. And then third is if anyone out there is listening and has severe anxiety or depression, just know that there's always an answer. There's always an answer, and that there are people there who really want to help you. And the fact that you're listening to this means inwardly you want that too. So just keep striving because that person is out there and there are always ways to make things better.
Oh, Peter, I love that. That's why I love talking with you. Now tell everybody, because you know they're going to ask, where can they find you? Where can they learn more from you and your books?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I do have a website. It's drpeterbongiorno.com. It's a long Italian name. So it's D as in David, R as in Richard, Peter. And then my last name is Bongiorno. And we do have an office. My office number is 929-379-0729. And yeah, I have a couple of books out. The books I have for the public, one's called Put Anxiety Behind You. And the book for depression is called How Come They're Happy and I'm Not. And those are available on Amazon. And I do have, for people who are really into the research and I want to geek out a little more on all this information, I do have a professional text, which is just published by Norton, and it's called Holistic Solutions for Anxiety and Depression.
Amazing. And your office is online, correct?
Yeah, I have a virtual practice, and then I also do some time in New York City. And then actually today, I'm actually in my office in Huntington, in Long Island.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and just dropping all your bombs of wisdom. Because as you said in the very beginning, I think with you, especially if it's depression, if you are in the throes of depression, it is hard to know where to go, where to turn, where to start. And even just listening to this, I hope it gives you a lot of hope. The same for any mental health concerns. I hope listening to this today, check out Dr. Peter's website. We will have that, of course, in the show notes. And again, my friend, I super appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And you're the doctor's doctor. You teach all of us and you do well what we do. So thank you for everything you do and putting out all the great information you do. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.